Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Now, our next guest is a first generation immigrant poet, a contemporary eco folk artist, and an award winning climate justice advocate. Her Mother Earth wisdom centered interdisciplinary studio, rooted in her global majority lineage, embodies the transformative power of art to build bridges between private, collective, planetary healing, and justice. She shares, curates, teaches poetry across conventional, some very unconventional collaborators that include local libraries, public parks, urban farms, museum, youth theater camps, global climate leaders, veteran circles, so many places. Welcome to the Poet Speaks podcast. Neha Misra. Neha, how are you?
Thank you so much, Amanda. I so appreciate speaking to you and everybody who is listening to us through time travels, wherever in the world people may be listening to our conversation from. So, namaste and hello, and I'm happy to be speaking. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited. You're one of the guests that I was really excited getting to know your work and just how you're combining. I think a lot of people don't consider the earth and poetry, climate justice and poetry, but you're doing it big out here. So I really want to get into that. But first off, let's talk about your background. Tell us, where are you currently right now in the world?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start from the beginning.
Sure.
So, my name is Neha. Neha means love in Sanskrit, which is the language I most associate with my nani, my maternal grandmother, who was a Sanskrit scholar. And I imagine she is dancing with the stars in her time travels now.
Yes.
And I feel, with my name itself, I feel it's an inheritance of love, uh, which is, as we know, light as such softness and heavy as the heaviest things at the bottom of the ocean that have not been discovered. So, with that
Mm,
inheritance and lineage, I grew up in Delhi in India, and
mm.
I now call my immigrant home a wonderful solar powered intentional community on the border of Washington, D.C. My home is in Maryland. My sidewalk is in Washington, D.C., which I feel is a beautiful poetic justice for my borderline existence.
Mm.
Yeah, so right now, the Turtle Island is my adopted immigrant home in this multitude of, being and belonging across more than one place.
Absolutely. I love that. Usually when I ask people, where are you at in the world right now? They just give me, oh, Los Angeles, California. They just give me that. But I love how that you interpreted that question from so many, where are you at mentally, spiritually, emotionally, traversing across from childhood. I really love that. That's a really, I think, a interesting way and unique and very authentic way to answer that question. So let's go back. I want to rewind back a bit. So you grew up in Delhi, India. Tell us a little bit about your childhood in India and tell me if you found poetry there.
Oh, absolutely. I feel this is why the inheritance and that lineage is so important to acknowledge, because I truly feel it's both a familial and cultural inheritance being a poet. And I feel like a poet poetry is not something I do, it's who I am, how
Mm,
I experience and move through the world. And my parents, my parents' home, I feel it just was imbued with poetry. My father, who's an engineer by training. Also, there are not these false, separations between art and science. So I feel like across my family, people are lovers of poetry. They have a poetic sensibility, and they may be inhabiting different like disciplines in life. Like my dad studied engineering, and whether it's on the dinner table or we are stuck in traffic jam, bam, a poem will come out. My mom, who is a doctor by profession, now
Mm,
retired, like in her breaks, in recent years, between seeing patients, she would like write poems on her prescription pad.
wow.
And the way I grew up, every afternoon, I remember when my mom would come back, depending on her shift at the hospital, when she would take rest, she would listen to beautiful ghazals and, Urdu poetry, wonderful Hindi poetry. And so the whole spectrum, whether it's across Hindi, Urdu, Sanskrit, English, and also growing up in Delhi, which is a confluence of different languages and people from all over as well. I feel, and I know this I feel retrospect when you are in it, that's
Hmm.
when you come, it's almost like looking at somebody, like if you are too close to somebody's face, you can't see, you have to like, you know,
Yes.
step
Yeah.
back. So I feel that the question of like if there was poetry, absolutely, I feel it's in my DNA. And uh, a very important story related to this, Amanda, is the last time I saw my nanny.
Mm,
It was before I moved to the US,
wow.
and she had been to the emergency room, and I'd gone to visit her, and her face was all blue, and I have this memory of her being on the bed, and I went and sat next to her. My nanny was an educator,
Hmm.
she was a Sanskrit teacher. And so while I was talking to her, she asked me to take out this diary, and it turns out she wrote poetry.
Wow.
And so I don't remember the exact words, but I know I connected with the feeling, and the
Mm,
thinking. That was very, like, I recognized it when this was years before I started writing poetry myself. Like, I always have been a listener and lover of poetry, but I came to writing poetry many years later while navigating loss and
mm,
grief. But I told my mom, "Hey, did you know Nani had this poetry diary?" And my mom did not know that her mom wrote poetry. And
wow.
after Nani passed in the big family home, uh, nobody has ever found that diary. and
Wow.
and yet, like, in my mind, like, that is some kind of really powerful, almost like a baton, uh, that
Mm,
he gave me, and my mother, who's a deep lover of poetry, as well, as also my father. I feel that comes from that kind of, I feel, family roots.
absolutely. Wow, such a beautiful story, though. I mean, so it seems to me your whole family, I mean, everyone was poets. Your mom and dad, your nanny, obviously, writing in that book. I'm so curious, though, from your perspective, you had both mom and dad, very, very prestigious careers. Mom was a doctor, dad was, you say your dad was an engineer, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, was there any, I know as someone as a Nigerian first generation American as well, there's a huge pressure
Mhm.
to kind of go in those types of fields. And definitely if you were to ask my parents now, they probably wouldn't think I'd be doing what I'm doing. But
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, I'm curious for you, what was that like, especially in a place like, correct me if I'm wrong, in India,
Yeah.
what was that like having those parents that did those types of careers and then you know, having so much success, but still, being in the arts? How did your family receive you, even though, you do mention they were poets and artists themselves?
Yeah, I feel it's such a important, beautiful question, both for me, and looks like there may be some shared threads, and so many people, right? So
Yeah.
for me, that's what I feel. So my parents, like, professionally, like, how they fed the family,
Mhm.
uh, as being through like being doctors and engineers, you know. In my undergrad major, I studied physics,
Ah,
and
wow.
I did my master's in economics. So I feel um, they did not call themselves poets, just as I feel uh, like incredible women in my family, they did not call themselves environmentalists, but they are the first environmentalist I knew, you know.
Yeah.
Also, it's really wondrous and also perplexing, all of it, right? The wholeness of it, like what words we use to describe ourselves and what names we carry. So for me, when inhabiting, you know, poetry, writing and performing and sharing and like deciding that, well, I am a poet also, you know, I feel they understand it more and more with time, you know. And also I have this I feel I myself have more empathy for how hard it must be for them, you know. Also their generation grew like that, my parents were born around India's independence after, you know, hundreds of years of British rule. So the time that they grew up in, like survival was epic, like that was critical thread of life, you know.
Yeah.
And still, of course, I feel poetry is also needed for survival. That is, I feel, why the sensibility is so poetic.
Mm,
And yet I feel I feel with years, I feel my privilege and luxury to inhabit poetry in more magnificently unabashed ways, to say, hey, I'm a poet, you know.
mm.
I feel it's something that their life has made possible for me.
Yeah, for sure. No, I definitely understand where you're coming from. Tell us a little bit about now let's kind of transition it.
Mhm.
Growing up in India, and then now obviously you're in, you know, your sidewalks in DC, but your home is in Maryland. Tell us about how you've made now the journey, the linear journey to where you're at now. Tell us a little bit about that path.
Yeah, so for me, you know, one, I like to, when introducing myself, in this season of life, I like to say my wholeness is that I'm a first generation immigrant poet. I'm also a contemporary eco folk visual artist, and I'm a climate justice advocate. And that wholeness is really important to me because I feel the world is reductionist, right? And it
Yes.
will try to fragment us that you're only this or that. And if one is not careful, one can reduce oneself, you know? So I'm inhabiting this season where I am the wholeness of that circle as a poet and as an artist, as a climate justice advocate. And in that being, how I feel, how I deeply came to writing poetry and sharing poetry other than experiencing and enjoying it, was through loss. You know, my early days in America, I went through miscarriages, and it was incredibly hard because I was new in the country. And also I feel this is my privilege, you know. I had not lost anybody like close to me out of their turn, so to speak, you know. And so to experience uh, death and mortality at the beginning of life, it was both. I feel it was very hard and also a most fiercely gentle opening, you know. So I feel in the process of healing, uh, I started writing poetry. And to begin with, it was for myself, you know, to make sense of loss and death and life and chance and luck and destiny and questioning. And even like I feel miscarriage is such a pathetic word, you know. What was miscarried? Was it a like a bus was going somewhere? It is such a non-poetic word, you know, for something which is actually sadly so very common. And also the silence about, at least I feel culturally, and even here, I feel it's so common, but there aren't as many open conversations about it. So for me, I feel poetry really helped me make not only make sense of loss, but I feel to not just survive through it, but to transcend it and to emerge uh, on the other side of it, not like a linear stages of grief, because I feel grief is a circle. You know, one goes through different cycles of it. And I slowly, you know, started going and listening to open mic nights in you know, here in the DC area, and seeing how you know, how people would just bear their their hearts out. And that, you know, for me, again, somebody who grew up in a more like not in such a not in such a raw vulnerable external way, you know. We all feel, and we are all feeling beings, and yet we all come from different both family, culture, backgrounds, where how do we verbalize what we are feeling is different, right? So I feel in that process, as I started writing more, and then I started going and sharing at open mic nights and connecting with very diverse, you know, kind of artist in the DC area, which I so love, because I feel, you know, this is my place of becoming, and we are of course forever becoming, you know. But because one of my, for me, biggest losses and transformation, because I feel again death and birth are deeply tied together, you know. um, I have known death very intimately, and that is why I'm also very joyfully alive, you know. There isn't a fight between them. I inhabit both, and I feel that that wholeness, you know, that transcending false binaries is a thread that runs through my practice, you know.
Absolutely. My goodness. Yeah. That is quite a journey, but I think also such a, I guess, beauty in those scars, beauty in that pain that you've been able to unearth. What I love about you, you describe yourself as Mother Earth wisdom centered interdisciplinary. That is such a large title, and just it means so much. You say you're rooted in your global majority lineage, embodying the transformative power of art to build bridges between private, collective, planetary healing and justice. Describe to
Mhm.
us what that means.
Mhm. See, now for me, what it means, and the again, to come up with even that thread of my own life. uh I feel it has been like most deep work, you know, which is living in that like one sentence, right? And what it means to me is being rooted in this understanding that our private, collective, planetary healing and justice, because justice is deeply connected to healing, um, they are in a fractal relationship. You know, there is no healing ourselves without healing Mother Earth, and there is no healing Mother Earth without healing ourselves. I feel the dominant Western narrative, even in like climate movement and environmental movement, is let's save Earth, save nature, as if it's another, you know. It's oxymoronic, you know, more moronic, because because there is no other, we are part of her, you know. So so that sensibility, that it is not, it's not a matter of shock that we live in a burning planet. 2023 was the hottest ever recorded year in the entire history of human civilization, which is not being very civil right now in the world, as we see. And that we live in a burning, aching planet, which is filled with burnt out human beings, is not a coincidence. And there's this beautiful cosmology that is found both in Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's found in indigenous traditions. I feel around the world. So Indra's web of interdependence, which is a cosmology which is very important to me. It says like imagine the whole world is a web, and at every node is this pearl, like a rain pearl which is shining. And whatever happens to the biggest thing in this web impacts the smallest thing, and whatever happens to the smallest thing impacts the biggest, the macro. So the
Mm.
macro and micro are tied together. And what I both experienced over and over again in even most progressive, climate environmental spaces is this separation. Like that people would be working in sustainability while burning themselves out. Be like,
Yeah.
no,
Yes.
I have no time. I work in sustainability. Wow. Have you paused and considered that if you are not sustainable, you cannot create a sustainable world. So
Yeah.
what does it mean to embody this connection between private, collective, and planetary, which is in a fractal relationship, which I wish more people can not just intellectually understand, but embody, an understanding, which is where I feel poetry is so powerful in revealing and feeling and witnessing and being witnessed.
Yes, I completely agree with you. That idea, I love how you use that idea of people working in sustainability, they're burnt out. They're tired beyond belief. Their own sustainability isn't even sustainable.
Mm.
I liken it to like you have people that work on behalf of social justice
Mhm.
initiatives, but we find out that they're abusing their wives at home, right? It's this kind of this weird dichotomy, right? Maybe it's not on the same level, but
Uh-huh,
it's that
it is very much. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's this idea of just how are we performing one thing, but then our lives reflect something different. I think you make a great point. I think especially with sustainability, I don't think that goes across people's minds enough. And it's the same, I echo your and I empathize with that idea of that with the miscarriages. Again, we
Mhm,
don't live in a world where we have these conversations. This is
mhm,
happening every day to so many women.
mhm,
Why are we
mhm,
not talking about it? We live in a world that is clearly dying. Why are we not talking about the fact that people are dying every day when they wake up? You know what I mean? Not only at the hands of global conflict, but at the hands of a capitalist system that has them running themselves into the dirt, right?
mhm.
But why do you think that is? Why are we living in such contradictions in our society? Why do you think that is?
Well, I feel it is by design, you know, in our so-called modern civilization, which is in a beyond time need of an upgrade. You
Mhm.
Uh, it's by design because we were told across generations to worship at the altar of productivity and efficiency and producing and producing and producing, right? Um, versus relating, versus more holistic and wholesome ways of being. Like even most of people, they ask, "How do you do? How are you doing?" I like to. Uh, I feel our doing is important, but what about asking, "How are you being?" Because without deeply grounded being, we cannot have really a flourishing of our doing, which can be good for both people and planet. So I feel it's by design that the same extractive systems that are harming Mother Earth have also extracted from us. That's why I feel like for me, reclaim is a word which is really important in my practice. So, what does reclaiming mean? What does it mean to remember what we have forgotten, and to not have shame about it? I feel I know, from even in my own experience, I feel shame can make it personal, like it's my fault. I've also experienced burnout, but being part of this like very glamour climate world, uh, where it's like constantly going, 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 who's in which country the next day. So, but it took me from in my own inner work to take the to one, be aware, and to take shame out, that actually these systems are designed like that you
Mhm.
know
Yeah.
so I feel it's by design. Yeah, again, to your question, why and how we reached here.
Yeah, no, for sure, by design. Now tell us a little bit, what is the connections that you make between poetry and climate justice? And what is that oral tradition and this idea of climate justice? How do you see them completely intertwining?
Mm-hmm. So I love that question because I feel it's a beautiful, profound question. I wish the question can float in the world more, you
Yeah.
know, and have a life
Mhm.
across different spaces and places and people. What's the connection between poetry and poetry and climate justice?
Mm.
For me, poetry is about both witnessing and being witnessed. For me, poetry is how to inhabit and expand our ability to inhabit both deep grief and sorrow and wonder and mystery. And I feel
Mhm.
often, because we live in a world of false binaries, we are told you can't, there's no room for joy. You must be sad.
Yeah.
Of course, the world is suffering. There's so much suffering. Or there that we I feel, especially in activist spaces, so many of us, rightfully, we are resisting so many forces that be, that if we are not mindful, we can forget that creation and joy is also ours and must be, because if we only spend all our energy in resisting, then
Yeah.
who will answer the question of what we are making? So for me, I feel, in climate world, in climate justice world, often I just see people throwing data, and there is a lot of apocalyptic soup. you know so not to live in a la la land, that of course we are literally living in a global climate emergency, and we are living in a time where in 2022, which is also the year when I became a US citizen, that 2022 was also the year when Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's leading
Mhm.
uh, UN body on climate, they said for the first time in their entire history, they released a report which said, well, colonialism had to do with climate, and still does. So for me, where does poetry fit in is, how does one make meaning? How does one feel the magnitude of what can feel like just so massive, that how do we process that? How do we sit with like immense eco grief, immense climate grief? Or like on the other side of grief is, or like so many people feel numb, like it's too big, like the
Mhm.
flight or freeze response is real, and it can be a biological response. So how do we make room for feelings? And
Yeah.
I feel without feelings, I feel we uh, if without acknowledging our feelings, we cannot make way for windows and doors and gardens and playgrounds of what does building a regenerative future mean, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think that's such a beautiful way to phrase it. And I think the idea of that resistance, and I feel like what our constant resistance does, so much of the time, fences have been built around us. So many of us, we've had to dig tunnels to get to the other side. And we don't even realize how much that has degraded us, how much that has weathered away our soul, having to
Mhm.
always resist in that type of way and finding a billion and one alternatives to
Mhm.
get to kind of our sacred safe space, right? Which is a human right, right? This world is free. You know what I mean? It's not. It shouldn't be a battle of resources. Everything is free, right?
Yeah.
Earth gave it to us all. There was no cost benefit analysis, right? So no, I love that. I love that a lot. That connection between that and climate poetry and climate justice. Now I want to move on to so you've had so much achievement and prestige as a poet. I want you to describe a little bit. Well, first off, before we get into your amazing reservoir, I want you to describe. You teach poetry across, as I had mentioned in your bio, a lot of conventional but unconventional collaborations. So, like libraries, public parks, urban farms, global climate leaders, senior citizens, just to name a few. Tell us,
Mhm.
what is the significance of bringing poetry to so many unique environments and places people don't even think?
Mm. It's part of the reclaiming, Amanda, that I mentioned, because to me, I feel we are innately creative, poetic beings. Our creativity, our our innate poetics of being is has been beaten out of us. So for me, reclaiming means making poetry accessible and bringing poetry home from the high horse and the towers, that say you have to have written a thesis, or the old white male canon is the only way to experience poetry, or one should have again a certain pedagogy to enjoy poetry, or that poetry should be dense. You should not get it for it to be like something to be poetry. So I feel, and this goes back to my own lineage, my own roots. In fact, before our conversation today, I was listening to some old Hindi songs, that just eased my whole like being and spirit. And they're deeply like actually poets wrote many and still like a lot of songs in Indian movies are written by poets.
Mm,
And so for me, like across cultures, and I've lived on three continents across multiple countries and communities. So I've lived in Asia, where my roots are. I've lived and done a lot of work across East and West Africa. And then, North America has been my immigrant adopted home. And I feel across cultures, like the poetics, and I know a lot of your work is on oral traditions as well, right? Uh, it is, mm, co- uh, I feel poetry is old as human beings. So how do we remember our, uh, the multiverse of verse, across multiple isms, of
yeah.
class, backgrounds, not in a way that disses them, but in a way where we acknowledge, very real, uh, both flowers and bricks that we face,
Mm,
in moving through life. And how do we reclaim and imbue accessibility of poetry in our public and private life, that is really, really important to me. So for me, the most powerful compliment is when somebody like comes and tells me in a reading or a writing workshop that, oh, I didn't think I could write poetry, or I didn't think I was a poet, and look, I wrote. So, and again, it's not something like I feel I'm not a genie, that I made anybody anything. It's again, how can we collectively remember, you know? Through like, sometimes we meet across an urban farm in a circle, and people bring, either quote unquote poetry, or they bring a story which has a poetic thread to it, and I feel even like learning how to look is poetry, to see, like for me, like, I'm a city person. I grew up in city, I live in a city, I love cities, again, I feel nature is everywhere. I write a lot of poetry which is inspired by city trees, across like my transcontinental life across India, and here in America. So how do we not just walk through, but how do we notice? How do we learn to notice? And how do we do that across ages,
Mhm.
So that's also really important to me. Yes, we need youth power, and elders matter, at all age. Our voice and our presence and our shared presence matters. So, and just earlier this week, I was in a poetry circle with veterans, you
Mm.
know, uh, and it was both, somebody at the end of the circle, they said, "Oh, I wrote this, and I was not sure I was going to share it, and here." And it was so beautiful. So what does it mean, the poetics of being and feeling safe, and to me, sharing poetry is being naked. you know?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
So
I agree.
how does one do that in a world which has so many isms, and where people feel like only certain people have right to call themselves a poet, truly, like, I feel everybody's a poet, but I also feel like we can arrive to our relationship with inhabiting poetry and whatever n- we call ourselves or not, like the
Yeah.
politics. I feel if that can be accessible to more of us, and it is within us, it is around us, I feel in that healing ourselves is our sliver of hope that we can maybe collectively heal, maybe our planet can heal.
Absolutely. That is so beautiful. I mean, such a beautiful statement. I love that idea of us bringing poetry to everybody. How can we do that? I love that you're doing that on farms, urban farms, public parks. I think that is such a gorgeous collaboration, and that these unique environments. And again, like I think that's so authentic. A lot of people, I think people view life as life is just for the youth. Just invest in the youth. I love how you said, our elders are very much important, and I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of us forget that, and life is nothing but just uh, a travel, a destiny, uh, a journey of seasons. We're going through just different seasons in life. You're in a different season every stage, every year, and it's important to bring honor to that, and bring that unique perspective, especially
Mm,
through poetry, I believe.
absolutely, yeah.
So tell me a little bit, moving on from
Mhm,
there, describe your role as a public fellow on the climate crisis. So this
mhm,
is for those that don't know, Neha it's a part of the initiative of the OpEd Project in the Yale Program on climate change communication to change who writes history. That is such a powerful statement in and of itself, to change who writes history. Tell me how you are bringing your authentic self to that position, that role, and tell us what that role is engaging you in.
Yeah, thank you. So so the history of that program, Public Voices Fellowship on the Climate Crisis, is to make uh, the public discourse on climate crisis more diverse. So the I found out during course of the fellowship that it won't be surprising to many of us who are listening to this. The op-ed space, the opinion pieces space, is dominated by white men. And I heard a statistic that overwhelming I forget the exact number. I think it said that over 90% of op-eds are pitched by white men. And not surprisingly, who gets elected? The one who pitches, So who's given that climate disproportionately, historically, and right now impacts people of color uh, all over the world, including right here in America. What does it mean for the climate discourse, the climate conversations, and narratives to be told by people who come from lived experience of being on the receiving end of the disproportionate impacts of climate change? What does it mean? So I've done a lot of work, for example, on solar equity and feminist solar leadership around the world. And again, majority solar CEOs in America, uh, over 80% are male and white. So just because a project is solar green, green is not equitable inherently, you know. What would it be if the fossil czars become solar czars, you know? So for me, like the important part of learning and my sharing through the Public Voices Fellowship on the Climate Crisis has been one, yes, a lot of times when one is used to doing the work, one may feel, oh, I don't have time to talk about it. I'm too busy doing the work, which is important. So to realize that to talk about the work is equally sacred, because we must shift who talks about climate grief, climate joy, climate possibilities. And yes, I feel we have many challenges, but the world is also, we do have solutions, we do have possibilities, and a lot of incredible leaders of color, leaders and communities of color are are doing it already, all over the world. With I feel that's true in India, that's true in through my work with a lot of communities across Africa, and that's true right here as well, through my work both locally and with larger climate and environmental leaders here in the US as well. So the one part is how to shift the stories. And for me as a Public Voices Fellow, it's equally important to bring the climate and art worlds, whether it's visual art or poetry, music, dance together, because I feel these worlds don't always talk to each other. When you even think of a climate activist, the first person you may not think about a poet, you know I'll send you a link to one of the pieces I wrote as part of the fellowship, which is how the climate movement must reimagine its relationship to art. So, what does it mean to not just invite a poet to an Earth Day event and
Yeah.
say, and not honor their creative labor? Can you come and read a poem? And what does it mean to actually, not as an afterthought, invite a poet or a musician to one Earth Day event? What does it mean to collaborate more
Yes.
deep throughout the year in your organizing? And there is incredible research that shows, for everybody who loves data, other than intuitively knowing this, that when you involve uh, different forms of art, whether it's spoken word, whether it's visual art or music, dance, one can connect more meaningfully and more deeply, even in public advocacy campaigns. You know,
Mm,
so what does it mean to not ask an artist when you're after your annual report is done for them to donate their art? You know,
mhm.
what does it mean to bring in an artist more in the formative stages of campaigns? What are the songs we need? What are the poems that can shift culture? What poems can work with, in collaboration with musicians? I was listening earlier today to a poet who collaborated with a hip hop artist about impact of climate on water in their community. So my work through, the Public Voices Fellowship is to bring these, what in my very real experience are these very isolated, worlds. In fact, for a long time, I had two separate folders on my computer,
Yeah.
climate and art, So
Wow,
as
wow.
a climate artivist, my work is to merge these worlds in really heartful, inspiring, courageous, bold ways. So we can really move each other, to action.
Absolutely. No, that's that, yeah, these worlds need to intersect. And yeah, no, big congratulations. I'm very proud of you for doing that necessary and amazing work and breaking ground in those predominantly white male spaces. I think you're just, yeah, keep going. We really, really need that. So I appreciate the work that you're doing there. So let me ask you this. When did you know that you were a writer?
When did I know that I'm a writer? I feel, knowing that I'm a writer, the time when I started saying, hey, I'm a poet, you know, I feel it was for me, as I was emerging through, grief and what that I was speaking about. And, when I started writing, uh, really, really, I just feel very um, widely and deeply, So, and one day I remember I just decided, like, whatever, all that I wanted to be, I actually wrote it on a paper. I
Yeah.
am this. What I wanted to be, I said,
Wow.
I am this. And I do feel there's something like the power of the written word, you
Mm,
know, and I feel like, again, I feel it's remembrance, So I
mhm.
feel that's when I remembered that
Mm. I love that. I love that. That's when you remembered it. No, I can definitely I relate to that a lot. Yeah, no, I love that. All right, now last question. Tell me, why do you need to get your words out?
I feel poetry, uh, Amanda, is such a profound gift. I feel it brought me from the edge of
Mm,
um, grief and loss into not only understanding and having a deeper relationship with loss and grief, uh, but transforming that alchemy of transforming loss and grief into a force of life and resilience and reimagining and thriving. And because it has been such a profound gift to me, I feel a gift is not to be hoarded. This was what I was taught.
mm,
This
yeah.
is my culturally in my family. That's in my DNA to not hoard gifts. And because a gift has been given, I feel it is my utter duty and delight. Um, it is my labor of love and love of labor of poetry to share its transformative power. Um, Again, not from a high platform, look how great I am, and let me teach you. but I remember this. Maybe, maybe I can also open some fresh windows, so you can also remember and access that transformative power to heal yourself. And again, when we heal ourselves, we have the possibility, and they are in mutual relationship, of healing our collective world and healing our Mother Earth, who is really aching. So that's why. And if I may, I have a short poem which is so deeply tied to the heart of what we are talking about, Amanda. I wrote it for this wonderful community museum, Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum, that had this beautiful exhibit to live and breathe, which
Mhm.
honored particularly women environmental leaders of the DC metro area and also nationally and internationally. So they invited me to share poetry at their
Wow.
opening. And so I really want to share this with you and listeners, because I think, again, a picture, speaks a thousand word, and a poem speaks a thousand oceans.
Absolutely. Please share. Thank you so
So,
much.
um, yeah, so this poem is called Questions We Must Ask to Live and Breathe. Who gets breathless views and whose breath is taken? Who is counting windfall profits and whose wind is carrying pollution? Who gets to lightheartedly live and whose loud wails do they refuse to believe? Whose lungs are getting suffocated by soot and who gets to pontificate in suits? Whose ferociously soft pace is healing Mother Earth and whose petro-machoisma is dreaming of colonizing outer space? Whose seed plantings, whose seed plantings will reap vivacious fruits from an ancient clay, and whose false green promises will catch up with their karmic plate. So that is my wish, that may more of us live and breathe vivaciously and reclaim the power of poetry that is rightfully ours. Thank you.
Snaps to you, Neha. That was a gorgeous, beautiful poem. Y'all heard it here first before she goes off and does it at that huge, prestigious event. Neha, thank you so much for gracing us with that amazing poem. Thank you so much for gracing us with this amazing conversation. I know I learned a lot, took away a lot. Really, I keep doing the work. It's hard work, but we appreciate you in so many ways, more than you even know. So a big thank you. Before we end it out, please tell us 2024 and beyond, what's it looking like for you? Tell us, and as well as where can we find out all of your amazing work and all of your amazing events and things that you'll be up to and doing and projects for any socials, websites, please do tell.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also, please know how deeply grateful I am in a full circle that this has brought us together in through a poet friend and in these
Yes.
circles of poetry. So I so appreciate you, Amanda, and may we keep doing and being and inhabiting this poetry wave. So for me, in 2024, best way to connect and to follow what I'm doing is through Instagram at Neha Misra Studio, or my website is nehamisrastudio.com. I do have a monthly newsletter, which is my own poetic contemplation. If listeners would like, you're most welcome to receive that newsletter. And I'm here in the the DC area, and the worldwide webbling, right? Which can be connected anywhere.
Yes.
So if you're listening, if this resonated or sparked something, I would love hearing from you. So yeah, find me. Neha Misra is my name, and I hope you continue spreading these beautiful poetic seeds and blossoms.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, Neha's information will be in the description link. No matter where you listen to this podcast, check out all her amazing information and her links in the description box below. Neha, thank you so much for being a guest on the Poet Speaks podcast.
Thank you so much. Lots of love.
Absolutely. Everyone, again, check out all of Neha's amazing work and check out the Poet Speaks podcast. No matter where you listen to podcasts, we are everywhere, including YouTube. All right, everyone, have a good one. Bye bye.
Thank you.